He had become the hero who brought peace to an entire continent, and finally, after countless battles and endless sacrifices, he was on the verge of returning to the world he once called home. As the moment arrived, a divine voice spoke to him, the voice of a god who had overseen his journey. For his countless choices, for the times he had hurled himself headfirst into danger without hesitation, and for enduring through countless resets and trials, the god offered him words of appreciation. Once again, he had saved the world. Yet the hero, Juyan, couldn't simply accept this quietly. He addressed the god, frustration in his voice, questioning the endless choices forced upon him. He lamented how each time he found himself running blindly into danger, it was never out of recklessness, but because of the burdens placed on his shoulders, the endless resets that left him no other choice. And now, standing at the end of it all, he asked what he had every right to. Was the god truly sending him back to his original world this time? The god, radiating a soft, divine aura, assured him it would be so. Juyan, cradled gently in the palm of a colossal hand, didn't let it go so easily. He pressed on, half jokingly, half in genuine demand. After being snatched from another dimension and made to labor for 2 long decades, wasn't he owed something? Couldn't he at least be allowed to retain his memories of the world he fought so hard to protect? But the god merely smiled, explaining that while Juyan had spent those 20 years in this foreign realm, time within his original world had been completely still. Not a single second had passed. The same applied to the god's own existence. In the grand scheme of things, Juyan had lost no time at all. Frustrated by the technicality, Juyan sighed, resignedly asking to be sent back. The god promised that a reward for his efforts awaited him, one he wouldn't consciously remember. In an act of divine generosity, the god bestowed upon him a fragment of his own divinity, a gift unlike any other. It was a small piece of cosmic power, a token that would let Juyan, though unknowingly, change the flow of dimensions themselves. His choices would no longer simply follow a predetermined path. Now, his decisions would have the power to reshape worlds. Even then, Juyan wasn't satisfied. He half-playfully asked for a hint about what lay ahead. The god denied him, as always. Juyan protested, wondering aloud why there were so many things he wasn't permitted to do. Couldn't he at least keep his memories of the continent he had saved with such sacrifice? But the god simply smiled once more. With a flick of a colossal finger, the world around Juyan blurred and collapsed. "Now go!" the god spoke. As Juyan tumbled back into the unknown, he shouted one final protest, his voice fading into nothingness. "Wait, hold on. I'm not done talking." The god's parting words lingered in the cosmic void. "I'll continue to watch over your journey, to the world where it all began, and where your destiny will be decided." And then Juyan was gone. When he opened his eyes, Juyan found himself back in his small, cramped apartment. The bright daylight pouring through the window made him squint, momentarily disoriented. A strange sense of unease lingered in his chest, like waking from a dream that felt too real to dismiss. He yawned and instinctively reached for his phone, the screen lighting up with a flood of unread messages from his manager. Panic jolted through him as he realized he was late for work. Again. Without wasting a second, Juyan bolted from his room like a storm, racing through streets toward his job. When he finally arrived, his manager's stern face greeted him, disapproval written in every line of his expression. "Juyan," the man snapped, "if you keep showing up this late, I really can't keep working with you." Flustered and out of breath, Juyan bowed deeply, apologizing over and over. "I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." Later that evening, exhausted and slouched before his aging gaming PC, Juyan muttered to himself in exasperation. He half wished to experience being poor for only a day. Why, he wondered, did life always have to be so hard? The overdue rent loomed over him like a heavy cloud, and even with 2 part-time jobs, it felt impossible to make ends meet. A sigh escaped him, realizing he likely wouldn't last long at this job either. It was then that something strange happened. A sudden, unexpected pop-up appeared on his screen. Unique trait. Skillmaster X is being activated. Juyan stared at the words in shock, his pulse quickening. In that moment, his entire world shifted. It had been 5 years since reality itself had changed. In that time, something akin to augmented reality, like something straight out of a fantasy novel, had spread across the globe. Fields filled with monsters had begun appearing, reshaping society's very structure. Along with these fields came users, individuals blessed with mysterious powers that allowed them to conquer the monsters and claim the treasures within. The promise of wealth and power turned the profession of a user into the most coveted calling of all. Even those who had no experience would risk stepping into the unknown for the chance at riches. While not everyone found fortune, and many suffered gruesome fates, the rewards were sweet enough to entice thousands. Some awakened with rare and powerful unique traits right from the start, while others were not so lucky. At the very peak of this new world order stood a single man, the world's #1 ranked user, Muhammad Ali. He was the first ever to reach level 70, and the sole possessor of the SS grade unique trait known as Dragon Tongue. His legend only grew when one day, Muhammad Ali uploaded a video to his personal channel. At first, viewers clicked on it out of casual curiosity, but the moment they started watching, they were unable to look away. Every mage in the world, every fantasy lover, every person who had ever dreamed of commanding magic, watched in awe. For the first time in recorded history, someone had cast Meteor Rain, a spell so powerful it defied belief. Viewers were left stunned. No one had imagined witnessing such a sight with their own eyes. The massive meteors rained from the skies, obliterating monsters so powerful they could raze entire cities. Nothing could withstand the sheer elemental fury, the warmth of nature's wrath incarnate. This wasn't happening in an S-rank field either, it was an A-rank field. Even more astonishingly, Muhammad Ali had conquered it alone, without a single comrade. At the end of the video, Muhammad Ali announced that the spell the audience had just witnessed was the SS grade Meteor Rain. Then, in a bold declaration, he issued a challenge. Within exactly 1 week, if anyone could show him a more spectacular, powerful spell than this, he would reward them with the legendary Elemental Ring, an artifact of unmatched power. It was the first and only SS-grade artifact ever revealed to the public, the ultimate accessory that every magic user dreamt of possessing. Of course, many suspected it was little more than a stunt. Some called him a show-off. Offering such a prize seemed excessive, and most believed it was just a way to boast without ever intending to give the ring away. After all, where in the world could anyone possibly find a spell greater than an SS-grade Meteor Rain? And Muhammad Ali had even limited the contest to magic users alone, all but ensuring he wouldn't lose it. The contest conditions were to be judged by Muhammad Ali himself, and the criteria were purely subjective. No one doubted he had no real intention of parting with the elemental ring. Even so, the world buzzed with excitement. Envious and ambitious users flocked to the fields, desperate to find or craft something to rival the Meteor Rain. The video became a global sensation for days, but in the end, no one could catch up, or so everyone believed. Later, Juyan sat on the edge of a virtual cliff, his foot raised, trying to squash a particularly fluffy insect. He marveled at the memory of Meteor Rain, watching the skies fall in fire and ruin in that now famous video. Muhammad Ali's skills were on a completely different level, leagues beyond anything Juyan had ever seen. But then, something impossible happened. As everyone worldwide tuned in to watch the Elemental Ring event participation video, history was made. Muhammad Ali, the untouchable #1, lost. And the world could only ask a single, breathless question. Who was the one who managed to beat him? In this world reshaped by augmented reality fields and supernatural abilities, when an individual awakened as a user, they were granted a unique trait. This trait acted as the foundation of their abilities, enhancing the effects of certain skills and essentially functioning like a class in a video game. These traits determined a user's combat potential and their standing in society. Over time, some traits became legendary. Names like Dragon Tongue, Miracle, Regeneration, and Finisher were known to all. Each of these came with extraordinary powers. A user with Dragon Tongue, for example, was a mage whose power could surpass even dragons themselves. A user bearing the Miracle trait was a healer capable of defying death, restoring life with a touch. Those blessed with Regeneration were tanks who could regrow severed limbs in the middle of battle and keep fighting, while a Finisher was a warrior who could deliver a killing blow to any enemy, no matter how fearsome. But then there was Skillmaster, a trait no one had really heard of, let alone seen in action, and it had just awakened within Juyan. Back at his desk, Juyan was frantically researching everything he could find on unique traits. The first thing anyone ever checked upon awakening was the grade of their trait. Grades ranged from F, the lowest, all the way up to SS, the pinnacle of power. The higher the grade, the stronger the trait's effects, often accompanied by multiple powerful subtraits. Suddenly, without warning, a bright status window appeared in front of him. His eyes widened as he read the notification. An unknown X-grade unique trait had been granted to him. An EX grade. That wasn't even on the regular grading scale. It was beyond the SS grade, an existence entirely in a league of its own. An insane cheat ability, no doubt. But his excitement quickly turned to confusion. Weren't high-grade traits supposed to boost one's basic stats right off the bat? Even ordinary people didn't have all stats at one. Juyan's basic stats, however, stubbornly remained at rock bottom. That was baffling. It didn't add up. Still, there was the trait itself, and that was what really mattered. His new ability came with only 2 sub-traits, which seemed low for such a high-tier grade. Juyan recalled how users typically acquired skills through skill books. A thought crossed his mind. What was SP? And more importantly, was skillmaster even a good trait? He wasn't sure. He had never heard of a quest appearing when someone awakened either, but then a system window prompted him. If he wanted to copy a skill, he would have to head out into the fields, yet, with stats of 1 across the board, that was practically suicide. Still, it couldn't hurt to scout for a few skills in the meantime. Then something incredible happened. The Meteor Rain skill window popped up right in front of him, asking if he wanted to copy it or not. Juyan was in shock. That was the skill from the viral video, the one cast by the world's top-ranked user, Muhammad Al. That legendary Meteor Rain. Could this really be happening? Meanwhile, far away, Muhammad Al himself sat before his computer. His assistant approached with mild skepticism. "Is getting the elemental ring to this person really that big a deal?" the assistant asked. Muhammad's eyes narrowed. The skill had barely been his for a week. What were the odds that someone else could stumble upon it so soon? The assistant reminded him that there were plenty of similar-looking skills out there, and perhaps it just appeared the same. But Muhammad wasn't so sure. There had been no reports of a field displaying that level of destruction. At the very least, the power needed to match what had happened in the video was SS grade, maybe even higher. He decided to take precautions. If it's at minimum an SS grade trait, he reasoned, then it's someone to watch. He instructed his assistant to give this person his card along with the elemental ring, masking it as a friendly gesture, a gift for someone he hoped to befriend someday. Better to stay cautious. Back in the mundane real world, Juyan was back at his part-time job. As the view count on his anonymously uploaded video began to skyrocket, Juyan felt a surge of nervous excitement. A small girl tugged at his apron, asking if he sold fried ping jelly. Caught off guard, Juyan realized he was so lost in thought about his video that he hadn't been paying attention. Her father, stern and unimpressed, stood nearby. Juyan snapped back to reality, fumbling to respond. "Oh, of course we do. Coming right up," he stammered, faking a bright smile. As he worked, Juyan couldn't stop thinking about the ridiculous challenge set by Muhammad Al. There was no way they'd actually hand over an SS-grade artifact like the elemental ring. It felt impossible. But on the slim chance they did, by some miracle, his life would change forever. He could make enough money to quit every part-time job he had, maybe even become as powerful as Muhammad Al himself. The whole world would watch him. Not long ago, that would have been an impossible dream. Now it felt within reach. A new wave of notifications bombarded his phone. A message popped up. "I accept. I'll give you the elemental ring with no conditions." The excitement on social media was palpable. The community buzzed, wondering if Muhammad Al was truly going to give it away. But those familiar with him knew he was unpredictable enough to follow through. People recalled how, not long ago, Muhammad had boasted he'd pay $2 billion for an S-grade staff, and when someone actually found one, he delivered the cash without hesitation. The impossible wasn't necessarily impossible anymore. Before long, Joyeon received a message from none other than Muhammad Al's assistant. "This is Lee Soo-yeon, reaching out about the elemental ring delivery. We'll escort you home. The master would like to meet you in person." Lying in bed, Juyeon's mind reeled. Was this real? Could this be some elaborate scam? The possibilities stretched endlessly in his head. He wasn't sure what to believe. Still, a single fact grounded him. His magic stat had just jumped by 40 points. That alone was enough reason to get up and do something. He should be out hunting in the fields. Yet with all his other stats still sitting at 1, charging in recklessly would mean certain death. He needed equipment, armor, and money. Maybe the views from his viral video would start translating into income. But if it came to revealing his identity for channel verification, he wasn't ready for that level of exposure. There had to be another way. Then it hit him: healing. Healing skills, he discovered, were a gold mine. Even performing emergency heals at the entrance to the fields could earn a fortune. Some people mocked healers, calling them second-rate users. But without them selling heals at the gate, nobody would risk stepping into the fields. A decent healer could restore broken limbs, treat status effects, and stabilize the gravely injured. Even a single customer per day could make a difference. Motivated by this realization, Juyan headed to the D-grade swamp field at Seoul Grand Park. But reality hit hard when he saw the scene there. All the good healer spots had already been claimed. He was left with a scruffy, half-forgotten corner. Sighing, he set down his gear. At least, he thought to himself, he wouldn't be in danger as long as he stayed outside the field. Nothing ever happened beyond the field's boundary line. But then, something did. Juyan stared ahead, startled, as a man stood before him cradling a gravely wounded girl in his arms. The sight was unsettling. She looked barely conscious, her face pale and streaked with sweat, blood seeping from visible injuries. Even in his urgency, the man's abrupt, informal manner caught Juyan off guard. It was an unwritten rule not to drop formalities with strangers, especially in tense moments like this. But this wasn't the time to argue about courtesy. At that moment, Juyan was supposed to be manning his modest healing booth near the field entrance. It wasn't much, a setup cobbled together more for passive income and skill practice than anything else. A customer came by and curtly demanded something called the red cigarette. Juyan was momentarily confused, unable to figure out what he meant. The frustration bubbled up inside him. Did they think he was just some clueless part-timer at a convenience store? Even though the healing skill Juyan possessed was a copied one, it wasn't worthless. In fact, it was a C-grade skill with some useful perks attached to it. He knew he had to respond somehow, so he quickly threw out a price: 2,000 up front. Guiding the man and the injured girl aside, Juyan set her down gently on a makeshift cot. The girl's body was limp, and a deep crimson stained the sleeve of her shirt. The man, clearly her brother, barked at him to hurry and heal her. Juyan hesitated. It was one thing to watch these situations unfold in movies, but it was something entirely different to face it in reality. He'd never attempted this kind of intense emergency healing before, and doubted whether his copied skill would even activate. But he didn't have the luxury to hesitate. Steeling himself, he called upon the healing ability: Light of Recovery. The glow of magic enveloped the girl's wounds, sealing flesh and restoring vitality as Juyan focused every ounce of concentration he had. It worked. The girl's complexion regained a faint hint of color, her breathing steadied, and the blood stopped seeping. Later, Juyan lay exhausted on his bed, processing the events of the day. He hadn't expected to need to heal her 3 times in a row. If it hadn't been for the elemental ring he recently acquired, the situation could have turned disastrous. The ring's plus 20% mana recovery made the difference between success and total collapse. Even so, seeing injuries that severe made him wonder what on earth was happening inside the hunting fields these days. One thing became clear though: he could finally quit his exhausting convenience store part-time job. With the money he was beginning to earn through healing, new opportunities were opening up. He considered investments, stocks, cryptocurrency. Perhaps this was his first real taste of luxury and freedom. What intrigued Juyan more than anything was the system of SP, the mysterious resource tied to his unique trait. It turned out traits could be leveled up by spending SP, and raising the level of passive income was crucial for his growth as a skillmaster. Leveling it up took 100 SP, and since his next quest reward also happened to be exactly 100 SP, it felt like a no-brainer. Completing that quest would even unlock a new sub-trait. Currently, his daily passive income was a modest 10 SP a day, meaning he could reach the 100 SP mark in 3 days. The plan was simple: focus on staying alive and gathering information in the meantime. Not long after, his room service order arrived, a treat he was finally able to afford thanks to his recent windfall. It wasn't just a meal, it was a symbol of change. Juyan told himself to stop researching new skills for a while and simply enjoy the food and rest. He ate eagerly, each bite a small celebration of freedom from his old life. In between bites, his mind wandered back to his plans. S-grade or higher skills, once shown in public, vanished from the system after midnight, making them nearly impossible to copy unless recorded in videos. This was how rare and precious those skills were. Muhammad Al, on the other hand, had casually demonstrated an SS-grade skill in broad daylight like it was nothing, something no one else would dare do. If Juyan managed to level up further, he might one day be able to copy and keep skills permanently. Until then, he needed to be strategic, sorting skills into playlists, some for immediate use, others for safekeeping. Skill shopping online had become an oddly thrilling hobby. Juyan found himself scrolling through countless clips. Skills like body strengthening and teleportation caught his eye. It was addicting, imagining the possibilities. Before he knew it, his stomach was painfully full. He leaned back with a groan, knowing he couldn't eat another bite. The next day brought yet another milestone. Juyan officially registered himself as a healer with the User Association. It felt surreal. Now officially recognized, he dreamed of how much his value would skyrocket if he learned not just healing, but also buffing and combat magic. He laughed to himself, half delusional, fantasizing about some stunning beauty sending him a love call because of his rare abilities. To his surprise, a beauty really did appear, the very same girl he had healed. She approached him quietly, a faint smile on her lips, and thanked him for saving her life. Juyan was caught off guard. Never in a million years did he imagine someone like her would speak to someone like him. He had initially assumed she was the girlfriend of the man who brought her in, judging by how desperate and worried he was, but it turned out she was his younger sister. She expressed her gratitude, admitting she might have died if Juyan hadn't been there. Then, unexpectedly, she asked if he was part of any hunting party or affiliated with a guild. Juyan wasn't. His current situation was far too unstable for that. She extended an offer. Her team needed a temporary healer, and she hoped Juyan could fill the role. He hesitated immediately. He wasn't ready to step into a field yet, not with his stats still so low, but before he could voice his refusal, she suggested they grab coffee and talk things through. She asked for his phone number and promised to reach out. The chance to stay connected to someone like her was too tempting, and Juyan eagerly shared his number. As they parted ways, she casually mentioned how badly she'd been wrecked in the D-grade field, even though she was an S-grade user herself. That fact alone rattled Juyan. If someone like her barely made it out alive, what chance did he stand? She explained that their team included an S-grade tank and an S-grade mage, and promised they could easily carry him through. Juyan's mind swirled with conflicting emotions. The risk was obvious, but when else would a golden opportunity like this fall into his lap? When else would he get to party with a beauty like her? In his heart, he resolved to scrape together enough money and SP as quickly as possible. One day, he would become a golden spoon mage, someone powerful enough to control his own destiny in this world. The long-awaited day had finally arrived. After days of patience and minor progress, Juyan had successfully obtained 10 SP through his level 1 passive income trait. Wasting no time, he immediately invested those points to upgrade the trait to level 2, and the results left him practically giddy with satisfaction. The SP gain didn't just increase slightly, it amplified fivefold, sending a wave of excitement through him. Sitting back with a glass of wine in his hand, basking in the glow of his small victory, Juyan eagerly pulled up the quest reward notification he had been waiting for. The tutorial quest was marked complete, and the screen detailed the rewards he would receive for his efforts. A cool 100 SP was credited to his account, and something even more valuable, his unique trait had been updated. Sub-trait 2 had been unlocked, and an exclusive feature had been bestowed upon him. From now on, any skill he copied would inherit a unique trait specific to him. This was a massive development in the life of a skillmaster like Juyan. Unique traits, as he knew, represented a user's tendencies and affinities. Though different users could learn the same skills through the skill books scattered across the fields, the actual power and effectiveness of those skills varied widely depending on their unique traits. It was precisely this factor that created massive disparities between users, even if they appeared to be wielding identical abilities. Juyan, until now, was at a natural disadvantage in this system. As a skill master, most of his abilities were copied, and without unique traits to enhance them, the skills he acquired were always a little weaker compared to those wielded by their original owners. There had been some exceptions, like the meteor spell on the tutorial map, which had performed extraordinarily well despite being a copied skill. But with this new feature, things were about to change for Juyan. Now every skill he copied would also carry a unique trait. even if the word random still lingered ominously in the reward description, making him slightly uneasy. He knew there was only one way to truly understand what this meant: try it for himself. It felt like the perfect time to finally graduate from his temporary role as a healer for hire. As the tutorial quest information materialized before him once again, Juyeon couldn't help but feel a strange sense of being watched, as if someone out there in real life was keeping track of his actions and feeding him these quests. Shaking off the eerie thought, he figured he might as well test out this new feature. He selected a skill to copy, choosing something seemingly simple for practice: summoning a flame orb that can be thrown within a 200-meter radius. It didn't sound like much on paper, but it was the perfect test case. He then wondered, not for the first time, about the boundaries between the field and reality. Was the Daegwalyeong sheep farm entrance truly the line dividing the two worlds? It had always felt a little surreal, and now more than ever. Still, Juyeon wasn't about to back down. He had spent every coin he had upgrading his gear. It was a cost-effective haul, but still a significant investment. And now it was time to change his hunting skills and head out. By the time Juyeon arrived at the sheep farm hunting field, rumors about a certain fire psycho had already begun to circulate among the users. People whispered about the crazed player who was gleefully incinerating mobs with relentless fireballs, wearing an unsettling grin as he did so. It was the first time many of them had felt a genuine sense of pity for the Nabolso mobs, who were being ruthlessly exterminated by this fire-wielding maniac. Some guilds had even attempted to recruit Juyeon previously, enticed by his unexpected strength and destructive power. They had promised him VIP treatment and enticing rewards, but he had turned them down cold. It wasn't just because he didn't want to be called a fire psycho, though that title was definitely a little unsettling. More importantly, Juyeon was still smarting from having rejected an offer from an S-ranked beauty, who had left disappointed and teary-eyed when he declined to join her party. He told himself it was for the best, but the memory still nagged at him. Juyeon sometimes caught himself laughing aloud while hunting, the thrill of watching mobs drop like flies too exhilarating to resist. But so what if he chuckled a little? He remembered giggling uncontrollably while spamming fireballs, almost drunk on the ease with which he was tearing through the field. And though he was about to call it a day, his mana reserves running dangerously low, the tutorial quest reward had come through just in time, granting a valuable 10% reduction in mana costs. That alone allowed him to keep up his spree of destruction. Checking the app later, Juyeon came across posts from other players talking about him. The legend of the fire psycho had spread fast. Everyone was in shock over how he had managed to raid the obsidian bear, a notoriously difficult boss that typically required a level 15 user to challenge, even though he was only at level 5. It wasn't even his level that was impressive, it was the insane damage he was dealing, much of it gear-reliant, but undeniably effective. The bear had gone berserk during the fight, yet Juyeon had stayed standing. He chuckled to himself, offering a mental toast to Muhammad Al, the #1 ranked user and his personal idol, for the inspiration. A few days earlier, the group had faced a massive wave of aggro mobs while trying to hold their line. In the chaos, Juyeon had been tasked with handling a rampaging boss, none other than the obsidian bear itself. The bear was in full rage mode, its eyes blazing with fury, and the other players were preoccupied keeping their positions and avoiding pulling more aggro. While everyone else panicked, Juyeon stepped forward and cast fireball after fireball, much to the stunned disbelief of those watching. The bear, caught off guard, was scorched by the barrage. For a brief moment, it seemed like the battle was over. The massive beast fell to the ground, seemingly defeated, but no one dared celebrate too soon. The obsidian bear rose once more, letting out an earth-shaking roar that triggered a debuff on all nearby players. All stats reduced by 3, strength decreased by 2, agility and vitality dropped as well. Panic spread through the ranks. Some couldn't even lift their weapons now. A seasoned player advised everyone to stay calm, but the situation was clearly spiraling out of control. The fight dragged on, a brutal contest of wills, neither side willing to concede defeat. But Juyeon had an ace up his sleeve. He had copied a new skill, one that miraculously had no conditions for use, no mana cost, and could be cast endlessly. It was completely broken, a glitch in the system really, and Juyeon knew it would disappear at midnight anyway. But until then, it was his to command, and he would be a fool not to exploit it to the fullest. With a grin, he stepped forward once more, fire blazing in his eyes. The roar of the obsidian bear echoed across the battlefield once more, shaking the air and rattling the hearts of the remaining fighters. For most, their stats had already plummeted into uselessness. Strength, agility, vitality, all reduced to near nothing, their bodies sluggish and their attacks weak. Yet amid the despair, one figure stood tall. Juyan, in stark contrast to the others, felt an exhilarating surge of power coursing through his veins. His strength, agility, vitality, and magic power had each increased by 9 points, the numbers visibly shifting on his status window like a storm of fortune descending upon him. The fight, though chaotic, soon tilted dramatically in Juyan's favor. Fueled by his newfound strength, he approached the rampaging obsidian bear with a calm certainty. In a single flick, one decisive, impossibly swift motion, the mighty field boss was struck down. Its monstrous body collapsed onto the ground, the earth quaking under its sheer weight. The beast's defeat signaled the completion of Juyan's tutorial quest, and with it came a generous reward, 500 SP and an additional 200 SP. It was more than a mere victory, it was a breakthrough. For Juyan, the feeling was intoxicating. As the battle's aftermath settled, Juyan's attention fixated on the obsidian bear's fallen body. The sight stirred a peculiar sense of familiarity within him, as if he had stood in this exact moment once before in another life. Before he could dwell on it, a message appeared. The obsidian bear's soul had been absorbed by him. This wasn't just any soul. It was that of a boss monster, something he'd only heard about in passing rumors and whispered legends. Boss monster souls were no trivial thing. In the hierarchy of field bosses, their levels were typically 10 or more above the surrounding field standard. Taking them down without leveling the playing field usually meant risking life and limb. Any attempt to bypass the level disparity by summoning aid from a high-level player would only lead to disappointment, as the flawed contribution system saw to it that a boss slain this way would vanish without a trace, leaving neither loot nor reward. This harsh reality was precisely why field bosses, dangerous as they were, attracted players from far and wide, for one reason alone: the rewards. A successful boss kill showered the victors with items of exceptional value. The materials harvested from a boss's carcass fetched enormous prices on the market, far beyond what ordinary monsters could provide. The obsidian bear was no different. Rare items worth hundreds each began materializing around the beast's fallen form, its body practically a treasure chest made of flesh and bone. Juyan's strength stat saw a permanent boost as well, now reaching level 2, and those who had participated in the raid would forever carry a fragment of the beast's power through its soul. It was then that she appeared again, the girl Juyan remembered, accompanied by her brother, both of them seeking him out within the dense forest that had served as their battleground. Their expressions beamed with admiration and gratitude. They congratulated Juyan for the incredible feat he'd achieved, acknowledging the raid's unprecedented success. This time, the MVP wasn't just the leader of the raid party, but also the mage whose overwhelming firepower had tipped the balance in their favor. There was no mistaking whom they meant. One of the soldiers, battered but grinning, spoke up, admitting that he had prepared himself for injuries the moment the obsidian bear went berserk. But Juyan's relentless, unyielding barrage of damage had kept them safe. Thanks to his sheer offensive power, they had made it through without suffering serious casualties. He praised the entire team's effort, though it was clear who had done the lion's share of the work. Their conversation was interrupted as a new window appeared before them, a status window displaying the details of the boss item they had secured. The soldier couldn't help but comment on the item's tricky activation condition. Juyan mused aloud to himself. Being required to drop below 30% health to activate it was like walking a tightrope without a safety net. Officially, the boss item and its materials would be distributed through the player association, ensuring fairness among participants. The soldier asked if anyone had objections, though none raised a hand. But then, a new presence made itself known. A wealthy-looking man emerged from the crowd, his confidence and swagger impossible to miss. He declared his intent to purchase the boss item for 90% of its appraised value, in cash. The sudden offer took everyone by surprise. Whispers spread rapidly as players speculated about the stranger's identity. It was soon revealed that these men were part of a growing trend in the world of field hunting: boss item hunters. These elusive figures appeared like phantoms wherever a field boss fell, offering immediate cash in exchange for rare drops. Rumor had it they were hired by shadowy groups with deep pockets and bigger ambitions. Juyan found it amusing. The world was full of strange characters, and these wealthy opportunists were no exception. Though their motives remained a mystery, the sight of crisp bills stacked high in front of him dulled any suspicion. Greed, as it so often does, won out. Juyan didn't hesitate. He finalized the selling agreement, pocketing the generous sum without a second thought. Later that evening, Juyan sat alone by the roadside, a quiet moment amid the whirlwind of events. He stared at the wad of cash, nearly 10 million won, resting in his hands. A sense of hollowness crept in as he wondered what the point of it all was. Still, there was no denying the thrill of the hunt. He decided to check out some new gear. At the equipment shop, the clerk guided him toward a high-end piece, Rekta's leather armor, priced at an eye-watering 63 million won. Only 2 sets remained in stock. Though far beyond his current means, Juyan promised to return soon, earning a cheerful wave from the shopkeeper as he departed. He couldn't help but imagine how much easier things would be if he still had the obsidian bear's roar, especially if it had been combined with the power of oblivion. Hunting would have been a breeze, but at least, thanks to his tutorial quest reward, he could now copy boss monster skills. The catch was that using the obsidian bear's roar required dropping below half health, a dangerous gamble. It was fortunate he'd managed to toy with the copied skill in another field before it vanished. With the streets quiet and no customers around, Juyan considered spending some of his saved stat points and SP. He entertained himself by mocking the fantasy trope of choosing a swordsman class, noting that this wasn't some whimsical game world where lives reset at the click of a button. Survival meant making smart choices. Daily quest notifications buzzed on his device. Curious, Juyan wondered what might happen if he copied the same skill twice. Would only the unique trait change, or could he store multiple versions of the same skill, each with different enhancements? He decided to test it out, copying Healing Light. Once again, the screen of his device emitted a bright, warm glow. A notification appeared confirming that the skill had already been copied, but offered him the option to copy it as a new skill. Success. Now armed with 2 versions of Healing Light, Juyan saw an opportunity. He rigged up an impromptu stand and began shouting his offer to passers-by, a plus 5% EXP buff for 5 hours, just 1 million won per person. The catch? It was a limited-time deal. People gathered, curiosity piqued. No one had heard of an EXP buff being sold like this before. There was hesitation, suspicion that Juyan might grab their money and flee. But he reassured them with a confident smile, claiming he didn't have time for games and urging them to pounce on the deal while it lasted. He imagined a pack of greedy dogs swarming for scraps and chuckled to himself. It wasn't long before he'd earned 60 million won. Just then, a familiar figure appeared through the crowd, a girl dressed in a modest hijab, her gaze sharp yet kind. She greeted him with a quiet warmth and asked if, perhaps, he was finally ready to reconsider hunting alongside their party. And with that, Juyan's chaotic, unpredictable journey continued. A serene aura of beauty seemed to hover around Juyan as he busied himself with his newly opened food business. Even though customers hadn't started pouring in yet, Juyan carried himself with the quiet confidence of a skilled healer. Not long after, Hyeji approached him with a teasing remark, noting that he hadn't secured a single customer so far. Still, she promised that both she and her brother would soon buy his deal. At this, Juyan's face lit up in surprise and delight, dramatically inviting them in with a cheerful, "Welcome, right this way!" Hyeji's brother, however, watched the scene unfold with a skeptical expression. He commented with a hint of suspicion, feeling like something similar had happened before. Despite the light teasing, Hyeji completed the transaction, handing her card to Juyan, while quietly urging him to contact her later. She mentioned her party was in urgent need of a skilled healer, planting a seed of intrigue in Juyan's mind. It didn't take long before word began to spread. A player standing nearby declared for everyone to hear that Juyan's buff was the real deal, offering a valuable 5-hour duration, along with a 5% EXP boost, fully guaranteed. Instantly, the atmosphere changed. Players who had initially ignored Juyan now eagerly approached, ready to accept his offer. Grateful for the unexpected kindness and support, Juyan felt a rush of gratitude for Hyeji and declared her the best. As a line began to form, he cautioned the crowd that he could cast the buff as soon as his mana recovered. Business was booming, but Juyan reminded everyone that it was a cash-only transaction. Hyeji's brother, watching from the sidelines, couldn't hide his frustration. He reminded Hyeji that she had previously called him a complete pushover, and now here she was, actively engaging with a newbie player without gear. In response, Hyeji explained their situation. Their party was strong, with her capable of dealing burst damage and her brother solid in his tanking role. Their offense and defense were well balanced, but they lacked one critical component: a healer. She saw value in Juyan beyond his current standing. Not only did he possess an unheard-of EXP buff, but Hyeji suspected that he might have a unique and useful trait. Despite her brother's protest that Juyan was just a newbie, she argued that this was precisely what made it meaningful. Before others could recognize his potential, they had the chance to recruit a player who might one day grow into a remarkable ranker. Juyan, meanwhile, was thrilled with the profits he had made, allowing him to finally purchase an armor set he had been eyeing. In that moment of satisfaction, he reflected on his strategy. Though he was working hard to earn money through active means, he recognized that passive income held even greater appeal. His excitement reached new heights when he leveled up and acquired passive income level 3, granting him a daily allotment of 200 SP at midnight. The implications were staggering. With SP accumulating passively, he could inch closer to unlocking critical abilities. Trait Bestowal level 2 for 2000 SP, Daily Quest level 2 for 3000 SP, and Skill Copy level 3 for 4000 SP. Doing the mental math, Juyan calculated he would need a total of 9800 SP. At a daily rate of 200 SP, it would take 49 days. The thought made him groan internally, deciding it was better not to dwell on it. SP could also be earned through daily quests, so to keep things moving smoothly, he needed to raise his stats quickly. Resolving to tackle a field boss next, Juyan realized with a grin that he had forgotten an important detail. His face was now known in the community as a healer. Perhaps it was time to dust off the hidden master persona again. His next destination was the F-rank field known as Gararim. Unfortunately, upon arrival, Juyan was met with disappointment. The entire field was a muddy, treacherous mess, making it nearly impossible for melee DPS and tank classes to function effectively. He thought back to the sheep ranch, a clean and beginner-friendly area. If only there wasn't a level limit on fields, he wouldn't have to struggle like this just to collect boss souls. Recalling the crucial rule all players knew, Juyan reminded himself of the most important lesson when participating in field boss raids. Field bosses were especially dangerous, carrying a high risk of death. Players were always warned never to join random parties recruiting from the community posts, believing they'd get a free ride. That was a mistake one should never make. Still, Juyan reasoned that things had turned out fine during the Pitch Black Bear raid, so perhaps this one would be okay too. Yet, as he scanned the group, he began to wonder if he'd stumbled into a dating event rather than a raid party. The awkwardness was compounded when a man from the group called out, surprised to learn Juyan was a man. Juyan sheepishly admitted that he hadn't given much thought to his nickname, simply reversing his real name. But now, by accidentally taking up a spot meant for a female in what seemed like a 5 versus 5 group date, he realized the other side of the party must have been thrown into similar disarray. Adding to the strange coincidence, Juyan recognized someone from before, confirming to himself that this was shaping up to be more than a simple group date masquerading as a raid. Soon, the self-proclaimed boss hunter began the briefing. Though some players might have familiarized themselves with the strategy beforehand, he carefully went over it again. The boss, known as the Mudflat crab, grew faster with every debuff it received, even those it inflicted upon itself, like bleeding. To succeed, they had to defeat it without applying debuffs, as doing so would increase the crab's stats, and if enough accumulated, it would unleash a devastating special skill. Despite the warnings, the boss hunter assured them that he had successfully hunted the Mudflat crab in Garorim Bay 8 times before, and that they had nothing to worry about. A girl named Hyoju clung to his words, expressing trust in him. Juyan, however, wasn't so easily convinced. He theorized that perhaps the crab's supposed special skill wasn't an isolated ability triggered by debuff stacking, but rather that the stat gained from debuffs was the special skill itself. If so, it might offer him a new opportunity to learn something valuable. As the battle commenced, Juyan skeptically wondered whether his cocky companions would actually prove useful. He couldn't help but scoff at their posturing. After all, These were players flexing in an F-rank field, catching monsters that looked like ingredients for clam noodle soup. True to his doubts, the boss hunter, who had promised to protect Hyoju, quickly descended into a state of confusion as the fight intensified. Juyeon called him out for running away instead of protecting his allies as promised. The Mudflat crab only spawned after a sufficient number of monster corpses piled up in the area, so clearing trash mobs was essential to triggering its appearance. To Juyeon's surprise, the players were fast and efficient at eliminating the minor enemies, their skills proving more impressive than he had initially assumed, at least for an F-rank field. Still, he kept an eye on the battlefield, eagerly awaiting the main event. And then, after what felt like ages, it finally arrived. Orders were barked to prepare for the boss raid immediately and gather as much information as possible. The strategy was clear. The Mudflat crab only moved side to side, so it was critical to always keep it directly in front and restrict movement to forward and backward directions. As the enormous creature emerged from the muddy ground, Juyeon's eyes gleamed. This was the jackpot he had been waiting for. The battlefield was in chaos. Everyone was running in every direction, desperately trying to avoid the massive Mudflat crab that scuttled sideways, its hulking shell glinting ominously under the sun. The problem wasn't just its size or strength, it was that the creature could only move sideways, and there was no way for it to change its direction, turning the field into a deadly grid of dodging adventurers. In the midst of this frantic scene, Juyeon contemplated the nature of skills. He recalled that if a skill description didn't specify conditions for its duration, it usually meant it was constantly active. A passive ability like that would continuously increase stats, growing even stronger as more buffs and debuffs stacked onto the user. In this particular case, they were up against a boss classified under the Boss Hunter category, which meant they had to rely exclusively on physical attacks. Juyeon couldn't help but question the party composition, wondering why the main tank had even shown up for this battle. It was then explained to him. This was Gararimbe's notorious field boss, the Mudflat crab. The boss had a vicious mechanic. With every debuff applied, its speed increased. Not just externally applied debuffs, but even self-inflicted ones like bleeding would empower it. This meant the party had to avoid using skills that would leave wounds or status effects at all costs, a difficult feat when most physical attacks had a risk of causing bleeding. Observing the strategy, Juyeon noticed the party's current tactic. The tank would draw the crab's attention while a lineup of ranged attackers chipped away at its health from a distance with arrows and spells. The party leader had intentionally assigned an unusually high number of ranged dealers to avoid the risk of bleeding debuffs. Yet Juyeon thought the pace was painfully slow. The crab's monstrous, thick shell made it difficult to deal meaningful damage without resorting to risky attacks. He began wondering how they were expected to bring the beast down without causing wounds that would only enrage it. At that moment, the boss hunter hesitated, realizing it might be time for him to intervene. Juyeon chastised him lightly for not stepping up sooner, and then turned to Hyoju, asking for a buff. Ever the enthusiastic role player, Hyoju promised to deliver a buff filled with her heart's sincerity. While some might have cringed at this theatricality, Juyeon decided it was best to let them carry on with their antics as long as the job got done. But then, the realization hit him. The solution wasn't to drag the fight out. The answer was to burst the crab down in a single, overwhelming blow. As he considered this, Juyeon noticed something peculiar. A skill description appeared before him, revealing that if the user possessed an S rank or higher buff-type unique trait, the duration of the skill would increase by 100%. Additionally, when used on oneself with mana at 150 or higher, it would only apply A rank or higher buffs, with the duration doubling and effects increasing by 50%. It was an SS rank buff skill, and to think something like this existed in a place like Gararimbe. Just then, a salesperson from a nearby stall cautiously approached Juyeon and asked if he and his companions were filming broadcasts. Juyeon tensed for a moment, wondering if they had recognized him. The salesperson explained that it was a growing trend these days, people venturing into the fields to record their battles for upload on UserTube. They even had a recommended item prepared specifically for customers like them. Though Juyeon tried to brush off the assumption, the salesperson proceeded to introduce a cutting-edge OIS anti-shake device, ideal for capturing vivid, realistic battle scenes, especially during large-scale battles. They cheerfully pointed out that if things went south and the adventurers met their end, they could at least leave behind spectacular footage of their final moments for relatives and acquaintances to see. Juyan couldn't believe it. What began as a simple tool to record a boss skill had turned into an unexpectedly crucial piece of equipment. He now planned to use it while activating Changing Resistance, a skill that increased his stats as buffs were applied, in tandem with Radiant Power, a powerful buffing ability. The synergy was astonishing. Even Hyoju was surprised to see a buffer of Juyan's caliber in a place like this. The boss hunter then called out, preparing to draw the crab's aggro so the others could deliver their attacks safely. Juyan gave the signal to Yeonju, urging them to unleash some serious damage, beginning with a fireball. Interrupting Yeonju mid-attack pose, Juyan prepared to use his trump card skill. He had saved it for just this moment. Explosion! Detonated embers within a 20-meter radius, engulfing the area in a violent burst of heat and light. Amidst the chaos, a soldier couldn't help but comment on the scent filling the air. It smelled so enticing, like something begging to be mixed with rice, scooped up in a crab shell, topped with tender leg meat, and devoured in one glorious bite. Juyan and the boss hunter shared a wordless look in response to the oddly timed observation. The boss hunter quickly snapped back into focus, warning everyone to fall back. The crab might activate its desperation pattern, a final, frantic counterattack typical of dying bosses. Despite the risk, everyone pressed the assault, determined to finish the job. At long last, the crab fell, defeated. The boss hunter successfully claimed the soul of the Mudflat crab, signaling the raid's end. Juyan was satisfied. He had accomplished everything he came for. Now it was time to return and test how Radiant Power and Changing Resistance synergized in controlled conditions. The potential was incredible. Before leaving, the boss hunter approached Juyan again, noting that Juyan's unique trait had to be at least A or S rank, considering the performance he had displayed. It had been a remarkable hard carry, and the boss hunter admitted he wouldn't have secured the soul item so easily without Juyan's intervention. He awkwardly asked for Juyan's number, suggesting that if Juyan didn't have plans after this, maybe they could hang out sometime. Meanwhile, the other party members were getting too worked up about item distribution. The boss hunter tried to call everyone back to order. At least Hyoju was still nearby, loyally staying by his side. Hyoju pointed out that since Juyan had carried the team, he deserved the biggest share of the loot. Yeonju, her eyes welling up with tears, confessed she didn't mind giving everything to Juyan. She felt she hadn't contributed much and was perfectly content to hand over her share too. With the battle over, they packed up and prepared to move on. Juyan reported to their superior that no boss items had dropped during the Garorim Bay boss raid. It was time to relocate to the next field boss raid spot. Everyone, including Hyoju, regrouped and stood ready. The daily quest notification appeared before Juyan, awarding him 300 SP. Exhausted, he wondered how much longer it would take to level Sample to level 3. The stats it promised were real, and combining Changing Resistance with Radiant Authority resulted in incredible buffs. The problem, however, was the status window. At level 2, Sample didn't offer enough copy counts. His stats might be soaring, but he didn't have the skills to match them. Clearly, achieving level 3 was the only solution. SP was trickling in far too slowly through daily quests. Juyan sheepishly grinned to himself, fantasizing about some kind administrator granting him a decent quest to speed things along. But of course, fate had other plans. It was already here. A quest notification appeared, and a wave of worry washed over Juyan's face as he read it. Everyone around him appeared equally shocked and anxious. The main quest had arrived, to clear the F-rank special field. High above them, eagles circled in the sky as if foreshadowing the battles yet to come. Breaking news reports flooded in from every direction. A massive F-class special field had suddenly appeared, hovering ominously over Seoul and the neighboring Gyeonggi province. Officially named Sky Island Kainel, this unprecedented event left the nation in shock. Gigantic pillars of light extended from the ground, reaching into the sky like divine stairways, presumed to be the only portals granting access to the floating island above. In response to the crisis, the User Association declared a state of emergency, assuming full control over the situation. The sky was dimmer than usual. The colossal landmass floating above cast an oppressive shadow, leaving citizens in its range complaining about the lack of sunlight. Flights at both Incheon and Gimpo airports were suspended indefinitely, grounding thousands of passengers. On the news, a C-class user named Kim openly voiced what many others were thinking. The field entry was restricted to levels 1 through 39, and the user association ought to expedite the portal entry authorization process for users in that bracket. As if South Korea's predicament wasn't enough, reports began streaming in from around the world. A special field had appeared overnight in Japan. A landmass half the size of South Korea had attached itself next to Tokyo, but it wasn't a sky island like Kainel. Some joked about Japan not having to worry about losing sunlight, though this was hardly a comforting thought. The problem was far worse than dim skies. The Japanese field was classified as a B-class special field, and its monsters were already spilling over into Tokyo. Level 70 monsters causing chaos in a metropolis of millions. The broadcast described it as the potential beginning of the end for humanity. Evacuation orders were issued for Tokyo, forcing over 2 million people to flee. It wasn't lost on anyone how grave the situation was. Level 70 was borderline S-class, an unimaginable threat for most users. Each special field worldwide appeared to be uniquely destructive in its own way. Unlike Japan's, South Korea's floating island, while ominous, was not actively unleashing monsters onto the cities below. The user association, working in coordination with the government, was devising strategies to clear the new fields as swiftly as possible. Bounties would likely be offered once enough reconnaissance and intel were gathered. For now, everything felt like an unpredictable mess. Jian sighed in frustration. He mused to himself, wondering if there was any way he could earn some SP, skill points, in advance. His eyes skimmed through the upgrade options for his abilities. Unlearned income LVs 3s. Gain 200 SP daily at midnight, requiring 5,000 SP to unlock. Trait granting FD grants one random unique F-rank trait to a copied skill for 2,000 SP. Efficiency reduces copied skills mana consumption by 10%, costing 800 SP Loviner 2, provides 2 copy attempts at midnight daily, requiring 4,000 SP. Daily quest Lovinown generates a daily F-class or higher quest at midnight for 3,000 SP. He did some quick math. If he added 14,000 SP to his existing total, he could unlock all these minor but essential upgrades. The only way forward was to clear this field. He had to succeed. Later, at a local shop, he finalized a purchase he'd long been eyeing. The cursed mana accessories were expensive, but indispensable for his strategy. He secured 2 essential items. Cursed Mana Ring, E, plus 100 mana, minus 1 strength. Cursed Mana Bracelet, E, plus 100 mana, minus 1 agility. Wearing both granted an additional set bonus. Cursed Mana Accessory Set, 2, plus 200 mana, minus 2 stamina. This meant a total bonus of 400 mana, a significant boost, even if it came at the cost of some physical stats. Juyeon reasoned it was worth the trade-off for now. Prioritizing magic over brute strength was simply the safer path in a chaotic field like this. Curious about upgrading his defenses, he casually inquired about the price of a D to C class armor set. The estimate, a staggering 400 million won. Shaking his head at the absurdity of the price, Juyeon declined. Accessories would have to do. For now, wearing an entire house to fight wasn't in his plans. Once he arrived at the portal entrance, he ditched his cumbersome glasses. He'd spent the leftover money on a compact body camera instead, hoping to capture footage of his runs for later analysis. Still, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling he'd been overcharged. Maybe he should have bought the camera from the start. Resolving to be more cautious with his purchases, he checked the community boards for user reviews before stepping into the field. The warnings were severe. Users reported that Sky Island Kanel's attack power was absurd for an F-class field. High-level users who'd previously underestimated the place returned defeated and humiliated. Melee fighters were urged to stay far away. As the name suggested, half the monsters here were airborne, making it difficult for tanks to draw aggro and protect their teams. Even ranged attackers struggled because the oxygen density was so low that players became winded after short sprints. The entire experience felt more like a D-class field than an F-class one. Some speculated that the post might be exaggerated. After all, people who failed tended to complain the loudest. Surely it couldn't be that bad. But as Juyeon stepped through the portal, the sight that greeted him left him breathless. The island was astonishingly beautiful, with bright skies and peaceful surroundings. Monsters weren't even attacking on sight. The serenity tempted him to just sit down, unpack a meal, and enjoy the view. But his momentary peace was shattered by the desperate screams of other users. Cries for help filled the air. Chaos erupted as monsters swooped down on unsuspecting players. Realizing the danger, Juyeon braced himself, knowing he could only rely on one offensive spell, Fireball. If any monster dared to approach, it would be roasted on the spot. Then, a sudden change. The tide of battle shifted as a powerful user arrived on the scene, unleashing Firestorm. The immense damage from the spell left Juyeon in awe. This wasn't just a high-level user, this was a serious force to be reckoned with. The overwhelming power visibly cleared swaths of monsters, their bodies evaporating in a haze of flames. Juyeon's confidence wavered. It seemed the island was more dangerous than he had assumed. He reminded himself not to get overconfident and risk injury like last time. As he prepared to continue his hunt, he considered whether he should copy that new Firestorm skill too. The idea was tempting. His thoughts drifted back to the healer he'd met before. Regret gnawed at him. If only he'd recruited them back then, today's hunt would be so much easier. The thought lingered, feeding his frustration. Suddenly, a monster lunged, attempting to mount his legs. Juyeon cursed under his breath. Just as he was about to retaliate, a familiar, unwelcome voice reached his ears. It was someone he recognized, though at the moment, he could hardly consider it a pleasant reunion. The chaos of the field continued unabated. The day had barely begun when someone commented on how expensive the shoes were. A seemingly trivial detail, yet one that set the tone for the randomness of events about to follow. Juyeon, who had earlier crossed paths with a healer in the park, found himself unexpectedly encountering the same person again, as though fate itself was scheming to intertwine their destinies. It felt too coincidental, almost like the world was insisting they should party up, despite Juyeon's clear intentions of spending the day hunting solo. Before he could resist, the healer clung to his arm, determined and unfazed by Juyeon's visible discomfort. Could you please let go of my arm?" he murmured, but there was no use. The healer had already made up her mind to carry Juyeon through the day's trials, and with a weary sigh, Juyeon gave in. There was no way out now. He reminded himself he still needed to copy the light of healing for her final skill. Feigning an urgent need for the restroom, he excused himself under the guise of a bathroom break. However, his real intention was to find a secluded spot where he could quickly access UserTube and copy the skill without attracting attention. It was a flimsy excuse and he knew it. The moment he started moving away, it felt like he was already dismantling whatever little image he'd managed to maintain. Juyeon could practically hear the roasting remarks forming if anyone caught wind of what he was actually up to. Suddenly, danger struck. An enemy began to stir nearby, its aggression evident in the fiery magic spells it unleashed. Fire Wall, Fire Rain, and Fire Spear in quick succession. Juyeon acted on instinct, countering and dodging as necessary. When the dust finally settled, she exhaled deeply. The area was clear for now. A warning reached her ears, someone reminding her not to recklessly step forward, though her nonchalant response brushed it off, claiming it was fine since the threat was neutralized. Juyeon, however, felt increasingly invisible among these high-ranking players. There was barely any room for him to shine. He observed in awe as the S-Class users displayed an astonishing range of skills. It left him wondering, if S-Class users had this many abilities at their disposal, how overwhelming would an X-Class be? The answer wasn't hard to guess. Most of those impressive abilities were acquired by purchasing skill books, a blunt reminder that in this world, power was often a commodity that could be bought. Resigned, Juyeon cast a fireball. It was a simple enough spell, something he'd used countless times before, but this time something unexpected happened. The fireball ballooned far larger than it should have. It wasn't subtle either. The difference was instantly noticeable. Someone called him out on it, suspecting that his magic power must be higher than he let on. "Are you really a healer?" they questioned, suspicion lacing their voice. Feigning innocence, Juyeon downplayed the incident, blaming it on a random unique trait. In truth, it was the effect of a skill called Overcharge F, which doubled mana consumption while increasing additional damage by a mere 20%. The trade-off was barely worth it, but in a game world where even healers had to defend themselves, every skill counted. When asked about his mana pool, he chuckled evasively, claiming it was a decent amount. In reality, He had 1,408 out of 1,510 mana remaining, an impressive number by any standard. He calculated quickly. He could afford to cast the overcharged fireball 13 more times if necessary. But he reminded herself, no matter how tempting it was to flaunt his power, he was currently Yu Juyan the healer, not a mage. He would have to be cautious, especially with other players watching his every move like hawks. The piercing gaze from a nearby user confirmed his fears. He was attracting too much attention. For now, discretion would be his shield. As the grind wore on, the frustration among the group grew palpable. One of them cursed under their breath, bitter about wasting time on such weak opponents. "How long do I have to keep doing this crap?" someone muttered, and another warned to stay alert for flying monsters. The mood was sour, their user pride steadily crumbling from battling low-tier mobs on Sky Island. One of them finally snapped, challenging another to take on a tougher enemy and die trying. But then, the air shifted. A system notification appeared. The number of deceased life forms on Sky Island has met the boss summoning conditions. Excitement and tension surged through the party. It was time. One of them eagerly claimed the first strike, demanding others to watch their back because it would be their turn next. Moments later, another announcement rang out. The Lord of Sky Island awakens. An ominous hush fell over the group. A player pointed it out first. "There's something there," they said, voice edged with unease. It wasn't a swarm, just one entity. And yet, its presence was immense. In the distance, descending from the sky, appeared a figure resembling an angel. But this was no celestial savior. Without warning, it unleashed an area of effect attack. Blades of light rained down from above, tearing through the party's defenses. Screams echoed as one player's leg was cleaved cleanly and another crumpled under the force of impact. "Appa, are you okay?" a voice shrieked in panic. The damage was severe. One of the players, having blocked a sword, now suffered a debilitating debuff that slashed his health, attack power, defense, and other vital stats. The effects would last for 10 agonizing minutes. Juyan moved quickly, casting light of healing on the injured, her mind racing with calculations. Should they stay and fight or retreat? As the boss's shadow loomed larger and more swords began to fall, someone finally voiced what several were thinking. "Should we run away for now?" The question hung heavy in the air, a fragile plea against the storm gathering around them. The air was thick with tension as shouts rang out across the battlefield. "That way! That way! Kainel appeared again!" someone cried, panic threading their voice. Juyan's heart pounded in his chest. That was Kainel? His gaze darted upward. The enormous figure hovered ominously, and dread settled like a stone in his stomach. Suddenly, there was movement. What was it doing? Was it throwing swords again? Players' eyes widened in alarm. The last time those swords had rained down from the sky, it had left chaos in their wake. They braced themselves, their muscles tensing, already certain they wouldn't be able to dodge. But nothing. Instead of blades, a torrential rain began to fall, each droplet unnervingly heavy. Confusion flickered through them. This wasn't ordinary rain. When a player instinctively raised his sword, its weight seemed to double in his grasp. His arms trembled as an unexpected debuff spread through his system like poison. "Damn it!" he cursed under his breath, feeling the unnatural heaviness settle into his limbs. Something was wrong. The sensation, the magic in the air, everything about this boss was off. Before he could gather his bearings, a guttural scream rang out nearby. Someone was being lifted off the ground by an invisible force, then hurled back into the fray. Juyan gritted his teeth. That thing even had the ability to strengthen the other monsters. A smart retreat was the only option. If this were a game, he'd have had spare lives to rely on. But this was harsh, unyielding reality. Considering the debuffs stacking against him, he knew he had to find a way to raise his physical stats soon, in addition to his spiritual power. The imbalance was starting to become too dangerous to ignore. As he pulled away from the battlefield, a sudden vibration startled him. His phone lit up with an unfamiliar name, Hyeji. When had he even saved that contact? Swiping to answer, he heard a cheerful voice on the other end. "Hello, Juyeon-si. This is Kim Hyeji." Her tone was light, but there was an underlying seriousness in her words. "Have you gone back to Sky Island since our last party play?" "No," he answered warily, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Well, I figured I'd be heading back there eventually, still having trouble nailing down that boss's attack patterns. But they say the Sky Island monsters are descending into Seoul now, like some kind of cross-dimensional invasion. It's a time attack scenario. Juyeon's pulse quickened at the implications. In light of that, to get to the point, a large-scale Kano raid team has been formed. Would you like to join? A few days later, the plan was set in motion. Juyeon found himself standing in Seoul Grand Park's D-Class Swamp Field, a place usually reserved for lower-tier combatants, but today it was teeming with high-ranked users. He scanned the area, recognizing several A-Class figures he'd seen on UserTube. Even B-Class users were scattered among them like foot soldiers. Why were such big shots gathering in a D-Class field? He overheard someone murmur that it was a preliminary meeting for the Kano raid, so this was just a warm-up for them. Juyeon felt an unsettling knot of nerves form in his stomach. These people were leagues ahead of him. To be considered for a group this elite, what kind of player did that take? He couldn't help but feel a stab of envy. Could he even be here? He glanced down at his outfit. At least he had intentionally worn different clothes to hide his identity as a mage. He had simply taken off his robe, hoping the change would be enough. Before he could sink deeper into his anxieties, a familiar voice called out, "Juyeon-si, over here! Over here!" His heart lifted slightly. Hyeji, finally, someone he knew in this sea of intimidating strangers. The moment was brief, though. The reality of his situation came crashing back. The minimum requirement to even attend this meeting had been B-Class. Was it really okay for someone like him, an F-Class healer registered with the User Association, to be here? Hyeji seemed to read his thoughts and dismissed his concern with a grin. "Ah, here we go again. What F-Class healer uses a C-Class healing skill? Debuff removal's essential for this raid, so we're accepting people without conditions. Don't worry." It didn't make him feel much better, especially since every eye in the field turned as someone shouted, "They're here! They're here!" The raid leader had arrived, and not just anyone. It was the SS class warrior Lee Hae-sung, leader of the rank 1 guild Daehan. His mere presence silenced the crowd. Tall, commanding, and intimidating without effort, Hae-sung exuded the kind of aura that made others instinctively straighten their spines. Juyeon's throat went dry. Before diving into any strategies for taking down Kainel, Hae-sung ordered that each team member's individual abilities be tested. "Let's start with a warm-up," he said casually, though his words carried unspoken authority. Despite the rudeness in his tone, no one dared complain. If anything, admiration rippled through the gathering. Juyeon was no exception. He found himself staring, quietly thinking how damn cool Hae-sung was, then mentally slapped himself. Snap out of it! Juyeon gripped the sword in his hand, feeling its unfamiliar weight. With his low base stats, he was barely surviving out here thanks to the elemental ring bolstering him. He knew logically that magic was his safest and smartest option. Yet, why did it feel so strangely natural to hold a weapon? Almost nostalgic. But no, not now. He had to push away those dangerous temptations. Until he found a way to sufficiently raise his physical stats, melee combat was a death sentence. Ranged magic was his strength. He shouldn't waste it, especially not with his impressive skill set. Yet, even in the midst of that thought, he felt a pull toward a particular ability he'd seen in the skill list recently, one that was absolutely insane. It instantly boosted physical stats at a cost. Juyeon's eyes narrowed. He had found it. If he wanted to stand on the same battlefield as these titans, even for a moment, this was the way. Juyeon stood among the aftermath of the raid, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. The girl yells it's a boss monster. One of the player attacks the boss and shots him down. Boss had been taken down swiftly, almost too swiftly. He had nearly killed the monster himself, but it was the combined efforts that led to the swift victory. To his surprise, even without directly contributing to the kill, he received rewards. Normally, only those who played a direct role in defeating a boss would be eligible for loot, but Juyeon had been diligently dispelling debuffs throughout the raid. This action had been counted as a significant contribution, earning him rewards regardless. Despite this unexpected victory, Juyeon couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. He couldn't help but notice how easy the healer's job seemed compared to others. As the others gathered around, the raid leader began issuing instructions. A final briefing was set to take place and the loot distribution would follow. They discussed the strategy for taking on the monster's defense, noting that mages would typically group together for simultaneous attacks. However, there was uncertainty about whether the boss's strengthened monsters were more resistant to magic or physical attacks. The team would have to divide into separate groups, deploying those capable of dealing physical and magical damage accordingly. The boss was felled in a single blow, but Juyan barely had time to process his part in the battle, but that wasn't important at the moment. Juyan was vaguely aware that something significant was happening with Santa, an unusual figure handing out SS-ranked skills. There was talk about healers too, but Juyan's mind wandered as he processed his own weariness from the raid. A few days later, after Canyon Raid D1, Juyan was tired, exhausted from both the battle. Status window appeared, making him wonder when he could collect those. However, it looked like he will have it all before going to smash Canyon's head in. However, he was tired from the chaos of dealing with E-rank quests that kept popping up on his status window. But still getting E-ranks like this was incredibly lucky. He longed for a break, but even as he thought of rest, his thoughts drifted to the new challenges ahead. He couldn't afford to waste time. The opportunity to level up his character was too valuable. Originally, the goal was to buff attack power with brilliant authority and resistance to change, and then unleash burst damage. But since Red Cloak Santa gave him Blood Frenzy, still 3 copy counts were not enough. If Blood Frenzy, brilliant authority, and resistance to change had an extra attack skill attached, it would definitely create synergy beyond the original. Juyan thought it would have been nice if he could save 4 skills anyhow. Now he was able to use 3 skills. With a sigh, Juyan acknowledged that he was far from ready for the next challenge, especially with a field boss on the horizon. It was the time to test the attack buff. Different users were commenting on the game. However, it was a field boss and he was not ready to fight it yet. He scanned the area. He realized that the boss was oddly growing on him. His eyes widened as he watched a figure move with terrifying speed, dodging fireballs as if it were nothing. The agility was incredible, far beyond what he expected from a mage. Juyan could hardly believe his eyes. The person's movements were quick, precise, almost as if they were seasoned in combat. A flash of realization struck him. Could it be? Before he could even process what was happening, the figure made short work of the boss with calculated precision. The chip damage inflicted was nothing short of insane, and Juyan couldn't help but wonder if this was for real. Whoever this person was, they were a force to be reckoned with. Meanwhile, a report came in. The field inspection was complete, and there was an hour and 24 minutes of free time before the next scheduled activity. A new piece of information stood out. Psychopath had taken down the mountain snake. This was a name he had heard before. Psychopath was a legend among the players, the one who had gifted him the elemental ring. The ring was a prized possession, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was unfolding. She asked if he is curious that if Juyan is the person behind this. He explains that it hasn't been long since he gave him the elemental ring. That item shouldn't affect agility and stamina stats. They are dodging all the attacks with small movements, almost like someone who's been skilled in combat for a long time. He suddenly asks her, "What are the movements of Raider Guild like?" She informs him that he predicted it. Right sightings are being near the special field. He ordered her to keep a close eye on Psychopath as well as the Raiders. With that much attention focused on him, it's likely that bugs will gather, hoping they won't trouble his friend. In the midst of the chaos and intrigue, he couldn't help but reflect on the bigger picture. With all the eyes now on him, the challenges ahead would be far more dangerous than anything he had faced before. It was clear that Psychopath wasn't just a player in this world, they were a game changer. Juyan was fuming with frustration. He had put in all the effort, done all the work, and yet others were reaping the rewards. His right to publicity felt like a joke as the footage of his achievements was being used without any recognition of his contribution. As he stewed in anger, a thought struck him. Why not upload the footage himself? If he created his own verified channel and shared his perspective, it could skyrocket. A title like Level 10 Beginner Mage Soloing E-Rank Field Boss Mountain Snake could attract massive views. He wondered what would happen if he uploaded the Canyon Raid footage too. The views will skyrocket. He toyed with the idea of creating a separate account to avoid being linked to his Psychopath persona, and even wondered if he could gain 1 million subscribers and earn a gold button. As his thoughts raced, Juyan's focus shifted. He had a task to complete, gathering materials in the dead of night. The task seemed simple enough, but the blackness of the night made it challenging. He had assumed E or F rank daily quests would appear, but the challenge at hand was much more demanding. only if he had seen the quest earlier, he wouldn't have had to come out at night. He had hoped to be able to rest after slaying a single snake, but his quest had other plans. If possible, he wanted to collect everything before the skills reset at midnight. He found one material, he picks it up while noticing it doesn't drop from monsters. That means in this wide field, he have to search every nook and cranny while running around circles. If the quest had been any lower in rank, he would have already given up on it. As he darted through the wild terrain, something unexpected happened. He suddenly dodged an attack as if his body was moving on its own. The sensation was strange, almost like the synergy of his brilliant authority and resistance to change skills had triggered some kind of automatic reflex. He didn't have time to dwell on it though, as he had to focus on completing his task before the midnight skill reset. On the other hand, fireballs were blasting. They noticed that even at this hour, other players were hunting as well. He could feel the competition in the air. The thought of encountering Kanal next filled him with anticipation. The advanced team had spotted the target in the northwest, and the idea of claiming the boss first and watching Lee Hai-sung return empty-handed made him excited. But there was a concern. What would happen if other users interfered with the raid? His team had a simple solution. Just kill them if they tried to take over the fight. Juyan was on the brink of finishing his quest when the unthinkable happened. He had already gathered most of the materials, and there was just one more item left to collect before midnight. He had even completed the requirement for surviving in the field for an hour earlier. Just as he was about to finish, he remembered something. His guild's raid on Kanal was supposed to happen at dawn the next day. Panic set in as he realized that the boss fight was slipping away. With the urgency of the situation pressing down, Juyan's mind raced. He needed to act quickly, or risk missing his chance to defeat Kanal. He realized that the main quest and sub-quest only said to conquer it. It didn't say who he had to clear it with or how much he needed to contribute. He wondered if necessarily had to catch it himself, so he just decided to figure it out when the time comes. The raid's intensity escalated when Kanal finally fell. Now was the time to strike, but Juyan was caught off guard by the third phase of the battle. The ground shook violently, dust rising in the air as the fight turned into chaos. Despite the danger, Juyan couldn't help but think that this mission had turned into an easy money grab. But his thoughts were interrupted when something unexpected happened. Someone in the raid was hurt. They were all flown away, falling to the ground with a loud thud, asking each other if they are okay and deciding to first let's check if there are any other pushed back guys and rejoin quickly. He asked Juyan who he is, but he stayed mute. They supposed maybe he had lost his mind. The pain was intense, and Juyan couldn't help but be concerned. He wondered if the lead doesn't know that they can't lose a mage at all cost. His focus shifted to the wounded player as their team worked to regroup quickly. As they reformed, Juyan heard a strange voice shouting, demanding they hurry. Something felt off. A teammate who had clearly lost his cool was asking what was going on, but the urgency of the situation left no room for questions. One thing was clear, they needed to move quickly and avoid being caught. Juyan decided to stick with their team and continue the raid. It was risky, but if he stayed focused, he could make it through. At least he hoped he would. Juyan was confused and on edge as fireballs suddenly appeared out of nowhere, catching him off guard. He had no idea where they were coming from. It was a strange moment of realization, and he couldn't help but feel a bit uneasy. Someone, somewhere, was in close combat, facing intense pressure. Meanwhile, he felt stuck. His role as a pure dealer leeching from a distance felt increasingly unsatisfying. He was too powerful now, thanks to a buff, and using his skills could easily make him stand out. If he didn't, it would seem suspicious. The tension was unbearable, and while he could tell that something major was unfolding, he wasn't entirely sure what his next move should be. With the fight raging around him, he continued to land blows on the sturdy punching bag. In a strange way, he almost enjoyed it. But this wasn't the time to be distracted by the enjoyment of combat. He had to blend in, stay under the radar, and scoop up the rewards when the fight ended. However, he couldn't help but notice that others were starting to become more aware of his presence. Someone asked them what they were doing there, and then chaos erupted. The situation quickly escalated, interrogating if 3 was a raid going on, and that the raid time that was announced before should now. It seemed like the people around were starting to notice. They inquired what were they doing here. Now Lee Hai-sung, the notorious troublemaker, was on his mind. If he found out their involvement, it would only make things more difficult, so he ordered his team to deal with the outsiders too. The battle was becoming increasingly violent. People around Juyan started screaming in fear as the situation took a dark turn. The raiders weren't just stealing the boss, they were killing innocent players too. The madness unfolding before him made Juyan's blood run cold. He had to get out of there, but it wasn't that easy. The group surrounding the raid wasn't acting like a coherent team. They were disorganized and reckless, making the situation all the more dangerous. The attackers were killing without mercy. Juyan felt a knot in his stomach, realizing that if things didn't change soon, they might all be wiped out. Desperation took over as K-Nell launched another attack. They needed to finish it off quickly, or they would lose the last hit, and that would be a disaster. Juyan's thoughts raced. He wasn't even supposed to be part of the raid, but there was no time to explain. He had to survive. One of them scoffed sarcastically that this kind of ragtag bunch can't be the raid party. What kind of lowlifes were they to barge into a raid and act like this? Not only stealing the boss, but killing the individual players too, to which he replied that soon they won't be having anything to say if they died here, and so both parties attack one another. One of them ordered Juyan to get out of the way and kill them and wipe them all out. Juyan wondered what shall he do, where should he stick to? Kanyul was attacking again, and if they lose the last hit, it'll be like cooking porridge and feeding it to a dog. Their plan was to take out the raid's healer first. It was a complete mess. He wasn't the part of the raid team. Juyan realized that they need to take down the Kanyul quickly to sort the situation out. Their firepower was spread out in this chaotic fight, so their damage output was lacking. However, there must be some good way. Fire spears were everywhere. She was going to get hit. But Juyan saved her upon asking. She tells him that hooded mage attacked his own side to save. They had to hold on just a little longer. The battle wasn't over, and every second counted. The skill copy he had available would help, but it wasn't a guarantee. He tried to stay focused, determined to get through the fight. As more monsters appeared, he realized the odds were stacked against them. The Blood Frenzy skill, which boosted stats by 2% with each kill, was growing in strength, but it wasn't enough. The raid continued to spiral out of control. With each phase, the pressure mounted. The final phase loomed, and Juyan couldn't afford to falter now. If they couldn't finish the fight, all of their efforts would be in vain. Every attack counted. In a final moment of clarity, Juyan knew they had to push through. His mind raced as he unleashed his fireball skill, hoping it would make a difference. When the dust finally settled, he couldn't be sure if they had won. The situation was so chaotic, and so much had happened so quickly. As he caught his breath, one of the fighters on his team called out to him, acknowledging his help. The words hung in the air. "You owe me one." Juyan didn't know if that meant anything in the grand scheme of things, but at least for now, they had survived. The battle had reached its climax, and Juyan was on edge. His thoughts raced as the fireballs exploded around him. What about Kanel? He wondered. The monster he was facing seemed to be a boss, and as the chaos continued to unfold, Juyan realized that the situation was spiraling out of control. He'd been caught off guard, and now, the world around him felt both unfamiliar and oddly familiar at the same time. A guy clarified the other dude that if he doesn't want to die, he shall get out the way when he saves him. He observed the others, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had anyone realized that the mage, himself, was the MVP of this raid? If the others caught on, it would only complicate things further. Juyan knew he needed to act fast. I have to take care of that brat and reclaim the boss system, he thought, frustration rising within him. He wasn't aware of such a level of DPS, however. Before he could process it all, an unexpected twist took place. The mysterious individual he had been battling against, who had been acting in such a psychotic manner, suddenly came into view. Is he insane? Juyan thought as the realization hit him. This was all part of the plan. The guy claimed that he was the one who had caught Kanyul. The other said that it was bullshit, while Juyan holds the material in hands, claiming they belong to him now. The boss system that had seemed so powerful was, in fact, a trap, a scam. Juyan was being played. He gritted his teeth in disbelief. Juyan wondered if he just got scammed. His frustration boiled over. He was watching over all those reward notifications just as he thought things couldn't get worse. A strange voice cut through his frustration. It was a cheerful, almost robotic tone. A tutorial assistant named Ego appeared before him, explaining that his main quest had been completed, and now it was time for the tutorial. Juyan, bewildered, could hardly make sense of the situation. He'd never heard of a tutorial assistant before, and certainly not one that appeared in the middle of a boss fight. Despite his confusion, Juyan tried to push forward. Ego went on to explain that this was a reward collection phase, and it was time for him to choose an upgrade. A second-class advancement? Juyan thought. It sounded too good to be true. Ego went on to elaborate that he could upgrade one of his existing traits. Juyan considered his options. He was weak for now, but the idea of increasing his number of skills seemed like the best option. After some deliberation, he selected the sample for skill copy, hopeful that it would increase his chances in future battles. Juyan wondered it's best if he increased the number of the available skills, so he chose the sample for copy skill. However, reduced to 2 was a bit sad, but with 4 copies a day, and if luck is on his side, he might get up to 8 copies. Ego inquired if he would like to check the other unclaimed rewards too. It was the item from the daily quest reward, the random item box. For some reason, he couldn't get out of fire attribute even when receiving this sword. This was the skillmaster reward box C from the main quest. Next reward was the addition of a new sub-trait. An extra line of option was added to the skill Not Bad, but what he was looking forward to right now was that shiny, glowy wing wire chain pendant. Still, Juyan's growing power made him feel more confident. His stat boosts were insane, and the potential of the boss system made him think that nothing could stand in his way. Caniel was nothing but light. Was this the final phase skill he saw back then? That was a relief. Beat him with ultra burst DPs during blood battle. But how was he supposed to defeat the ultra-strong fallen angel Caniel after he descends? However, there was a cautionary note in the back of his mind. His new skills had a 30-day cooldown. He needed to be careful with how he used them. With his SP now exceeding 20,000, Juyan took a moment to strategize. Efficiency was the key to maximizing his new abilities. He chose the sample for safety, eager to begin exploring the full extent of his powers. Even ongoing growth depends on the daily quests. Just as he thought the chaos was over, Ego's voice once again rang out. Juyan thought they were done, but there was more. Ego revealed that until now it was just claiming rewards. Ego asked him if he remembers the last sentence of his main quest. The real tutorial was about to begin. Juyan could hardly process it, but Ego reminded him of the last line of his main quest. To conquer the special field for the survival of Earth and humans is at stake. The weight of those words hit Juyan like a freight train. What does that mean, he wondered. Ego's answer was chilling. Your world is about to be destroyed by invaders from another dimension. The revelation left him speechless. What had he gotten himself into? After the boss of Sky Island Kainel naturally disappeared after the boss was defeated, the floating landmass naturally disappeared. The skies, once obscured and threatened by the towering fortress above, were now clear again. The citizens of the nearby region, who had long suffered under its ominous shadow, reclaimed their peace. However, while the gate connecting to Sky Island had vanished, a new space distortion phenomenon began manifesting nearby. It wasn't something that could be ignored, and the possibility of the field mutating again loomed heavily in the minds of those monitoring it. Even though the outcome of the raid had already been partially leaked through various video recordings, it was undeniable that setbacks had occurred. A group of unidentified individuals had maliciously stolen the boss kill at the last moment, robbing the official raid team of the final blow. Despite that humiliating interference, the raid on Kainel was considered a success, and immediately after the battle, the mysterious interlopers vanished without a trace. People were curious about the rewards for the special field boss, wondering what extraordinary drops had been secured. The first confirmation that came through was that all player stats involved in the raid had increased, yet when it came to boss-exclusive items, there seemed to be nothing noteworthy. The lack of any unique gear left a palpable sense of disappointment. Requests were quickly made to Silioff TV to send over their footage and data for review. Some suspected one of the interlopers might soon face severe consequences if caught, especially if Lee Hae-sung, known for his ruthlessness, laid hands on them. However, no one could reach the suspected individuals. Calls went straight to voicemail. In the face of these dead ends, people speculated if their deductions had been wrong all along. Someone tried reasoning through the situation logically. If the wizard seen during the raid was standard, his equipment would have reflected it, and his signature mana attack, Fireball, might not have made sense in the context of what was witnessed. The calculations and observations pointed to something else entirely. In hushed tones, the nickname psychopath was tossed around, referring to K-Nell and, perhaps more accurately, to one particular individual of interest. Then, someone decided to cut through the speculation and directly confront the person they suspected, Juyeon Yu. She started, asking bluntly if he was the wizard who had assisted during the raid. The reply came swiftly, but evasively. She tried to explain that the gear he was wearing was similar to Juyeon's, so she tried to contact him. Juyeon feigned ignorance, pretending not to understand what was being asked. He insisted that he hadn't even participated in the raid and claimed to have been invited but unable to attend. To dodge the conversation, he made up an excuse about being in the shower and hung up, letting the call route to voicemail. Those on the other side of the line were unconvinced. They muttered about how suspicious it was that he vanished before anyone could talk to him face to face. His attempts to avoid contact only deepened their suspicions. Annoyance grew as calls repeatedly went unanswered and bizarre rumors started circulating. Amidst all this, Juyeon's inner monologue turned toward darker, stranger revelations. He was reminded of the words of a mysterious voice, a declaration that his world was teetering on the edge of destruction from invaders hailing from other dimensions. But despite this impending catastrophe, Juyeon possessed a unique power, skillmaster. It was a subordinate authority, a rare gift typically granted by divine forces capable of altering reality itself. This power was supposedly a divine blessing, but Juyeon remained skeptical. Having spent his life drifting through military service and mundane struggles, he hardly saw himself as chosen by the gods. The voice had urged him not to overthink it. He had already achieved much and received various rewards along the way. Now, however, there was one final decision left for him. The voice posed a crucial question. Would Juyeon continue to live as he pleased, content to merely survive while shouldering the weight of his ability? Or would he accept the burdensome responsibility of saving a world on the brink, fully awakening the dormant potential within him? The choice, as it always had been, was his alone. Salvation, after all, was not inherently the hero's duty. It was but one of many possible paths. Juyeon scoffed at the melodramatic ultimatum. For someone who, until recently, had been nothing more than a lazy, aimless drifter, the idea of world salvation felt ridiculous. He decided to set it aside, finish his bath, and treat himself to beer and fried chicken instead. That, for now, felt like a far more attainable and meaningful goal. Elsewhere, another figure was obsessing over Juyeon's identity. Based on sharp intuition and careful deduction, she became more and more certain. Juyeon Yu was without a doubt a psychopath. Yet lacking concrete proof, she felt compelled to meet him face to face. When questioned about her fixation, she explained that even top-tier players weren't safe in field zones where death could strike at any moment. If she was to risk her life daily, she wanted someone formidable like Juyeon on her team. Her companion advised caution, warning against reckless behavior. But she had already pieced together a solid theory about Juyeon's habits. After causing a commotion on Sky Island and disappearing without leaving a trace, it was clear he was highly cautious about being exposed. His level likely hadn't exceeded 40, which meant he would avoid heavily populated A or B grade fields. His desperation for money also stood out. He lacked a car, so he probably traveled on foot or via public transport. If she narrow downs the range accordingly, she expects that Juyeon would eventually emerge to hunt in a D-grade spider cave near the metropolitan area. Her associate doubted the accuracy of this guesswork, calling it overly optimistic. At that very moment, Juyeon himself arrived at the D-grade field, claiming to be there only to sell healing items. When approached and confronted, Juyeon continued to insist on his innocence, pretending to be an ordinary healer. The interaction turned tense, with his pursuer pushing for a confession. When pressed further, Juyeon showed visible frustration. Negotiations quickly followed. She offered him $500 per hour to join her, reasoning that wasting time trying to convince her otherwise was pointless. Despite his reluctance, Juyeon grudgingly accepted the offer, stating he didn't quite understand what was meant by light, but agreeing nonetheless since money was involved. Before they left, Juyeon excused himself to use the bathroom. His companion even confirmed his absence during this time, leaving Juyeon embarrassed. He sighed, certain that he'd now gained a humiliating new reputation as that guy who always runs off to the bathroom. And with that awkward interlude behind them, they prepared to head into the field together. After the chaos of the Canal raid, word began to spread about a mysterious wizard who had helped bring down the boss before vanishing without a trace. Rumors swirled through the player community, and some were determined to uncover the truth. One particularly persistent player, convinced he had pieced things together, confronted Juyan. With barely contained excitement, he blurted out his theory: the scampering wizard who'd helped during the raid and the suspiciously powerful psychopath roaming the fields. Both of them were Juyan. Feigning ignorance, Juyan responded with deliberate vagueness, pretending not to hear properly, trying to downplay the conversation. But the other player wasn't giving up so easily. He pressed on, certain of his deduction. The two met up at a D-class field known as the Spider Hole, a place thick with monsters. The player, despite Juyan's attempts to remain low-key, insisted that if Juyan truly was the one from the Kainel incident, he wanted to repay him for his help. Claiming to work in the same line of business, the player swore to keep Juyan's secret, no matter what. The conversation only made it clearer. The so-called scammer wizard was without a doubt a psychopath, though it was still amusing how casually Juyan played along. Another player, named Light, chimed in, reminding them that they had promised to pay Juyan back. At this point, there was no way to deny it. The evidence was overwhelming, and Juyan reluctantly admitted it, but begged them not to spread the information further. This admission came as no surprise. The others had already suspected it due to Juyan's noticeable magic power, which exceeded their own. He attributed this to gear bonuses, claiming that equipment made all the difference. When asked what skill books he used for buffs and healing, Juyan kept things vague, knowing it wasn't wise to reveal too much. The Spider Hole was a high-level D-class field teeming with monsters. One player remarked that they were probably getting tired of just messing around, to which Juyan nonchalantly agreed. Afterward, the other player praised him for his work, pointing out that since Juyan had earned his promised 500, he would now clear the remaining monsters on his own. However, what caught everyone off guard was when Juyan suddenly revealed a magic sword. They hadn't known he was even capable of using one. Juyan explained he couldn't afford a staff at the time, so he opted for a sword with a high magic power stat as a substitute. It wasn't ideal, but it served its purpose. Since the situation had escalated, Juyan decided to run a skill test. Expecting a fire spell, the others were surprised when he used ice magic instead. Juyan calmly explained that one of the advantages of being a skillmaster was the ability to wield various types of magic. He cast Ice Spear, and then cleverly layered additional effects, poisoning the monster using poison magic, and amplifying it with a boss-level skill called Catalyst. He acknowledged that while ice magic wasn't bad, it was better to avoid using fireballs for a while, as it could blow his cover. Curious, someone asked if he wasn't a flame mage, to which Juyan casually admitted that fireballs were a bit weak compared to other types of magic. One of the others, still baffled by his abilities, wondered aloud what Juyan actually was. Later, the monster hunting continued, and Juyan took down the boss monster with a single decisive strike. Although no soul dropped from the monster, Juyan was still satisfied. Even though the others had contributed to the hunt, it was Juyan who ended up with all the loot. Grinning, one of the players suggested they celebrate, offering to buy him a glass of wine and inviting him to eat some grilled meat afterward. Juyan remembered that technically, he was still part of a hunting party and figured it wouldn't hurt to relax for a bit. However, before long, someone approached Juyan with a serious proposal. The man reminded him that though they had once been friends and even considered themselves like brothers, things had become complicated. In the field, monsters weren't the only threats. PvP battles between players were common, just like what had happened during the Canal raid. He explained that while powerful individuals might eventually handle things on their own, in practice, no one hunted boss monsters solo. The danger was too high. He continued, emphasizing that dealing with high-level fields without a tank, without a plan, and without properly managing item sales and taxes would be a nightmare for anyone. But he offered to handle all of that for Juyan, proposing that Juyan focus solely on hunting while he managed the logistics. Curious, Juyan asked if he was serious about signing a contract with him. The man confirmed it. Reliable users were rare in the business, and Juyan was undeniably strong, not to mention that they shared a valuable secret. The man explained that while monsters left behind loot, people left behind their reputations. If Juyan couldn't reach the top alone, he could certainly rise there with a capable ally. He added a tempting perk. If Juyan signed, he'd get a free office tel in a building reserved exclusively for hunters, and as a bonus, the world's most beautiful woman would be living next door. Playfully, the man dramatically declared that Juyeon probably already knew who that woman was. Amused, Juyeon agreed that the offer was too good to refuse. They celebrated by signing the contract, and the man cheerfully asked Juyeon to sit down and eat, admitting it was a bit embarrassing how excited he was. He laid out the conditions. Field schedules would prioritize Party A's requests, and he would handle all of Juyeon's non-hunting affairs, from daily logistics to finances. Juyeon was given a card for purchases and informed that the man would manage all his earnings from field hunts. When asked if Juyeon needed any further explanations, Juyeon shook his head, calling the explanation perfectly clear and even praising how amazing it all sounded. From then on, hunting felt far easier. Even though Juyeon had previously avoided dealing with others because of his complicated circumstances, he had to admit to himself, Hyejin, the woman they spoke of, was genuinely beautiful. It was unexpected for someone like her to volunteer to manage his affairs. Juyeon activated Catalyst, thinking to himself that he didn't envy anyone now. Ever since obtaining that skill, things had gone unusually well for him. He leveled up, succeeded in a gacha draw, and celebrated the fact that he no longer had to deal with the annoyance of Lee Hae-sung. Eager to test his newly boosted power, Juyeon planned to use Ice Spear again. Someone nearby acknowledged his strength, noting how formidable he had become. Juyeon thought about how much more powerful his attacks would be if he combined Fireball with Blood Combat EX, his enhanced combat skill. Seizing the opportunity, he called out to Kim Hyeji, surprising her with his sudden energy. He ordered everyone to get ready. It was time to head back into the field. In hindsight, Juyeon realized he had gotten a little too comfortable, a little too relaxed. But it was time to shake off that complacency and get serious again. To be continued. We'll cover the next story very soon. Stay tuned. If you like the story, let me know in the comments.